All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Robert Lee. Today I'll be presenting on the interim years of cyberspace, sort of just my views on where we currently are in the domain. I am an Air Force cyberspace operations officer. I work in Germany for FISRA, which is the Air Force Intelligence Surveillance Reconnaissance Agency. Some cool people to work with, and I do cyber. All right, so first things first, just to let everyone know that these are my opinions, these are my thoughts. They're not the government, not the Air Force, no one else. So if anyone has any issues with them, feel free to email me. I love good intellectual debates, but again, not representative of the government. All right, so these are the takeaways that I want to give everyone today. I really want to focus on lessons learned from air power and some of the things that they picked up when they went through the interim years of air power, aspects of the interim years of cyber, so to talk about how I define it and some of the aspects that I believe encompass the domain currently, the need for civilian and military partnership for really tackling advanced threats, things that you can't just create signatures for, and the seriousness of what the future holds beyond just the security budget or CISO meetings. So, jump right in. We'll get into the lessons learned from air power. So the interim years of air power were really this time when, between World War I and World War II, where air power really came into its own. This is the time of advocates and pioneers and air shows and technological developments that really secured the air domain. It allowed us to win the air domain. That's what I sort of feel how we are currently in cyber, but if you'll notice, some of the things that are going on at air shows are very similar to those technological conferences that we go to. I think that we're a little bit off on our approach. If you remember air shows, they were cheap, they were free, they were inspiring. Kids go to air shows, they see these technological developments, they get inspired, they look up, they go, man, I want to fly that, or I want to build that, or I want to have some part in this domain. I think that we're currently missing out on that in terms of cyber. Conferences are great, including this one. They appeal to different people, different companies, whatever, but we have very expensive conferences, very expensive training, very expensive developments in the domain that's not available to everyone. And I feel that that's part of where we're failing as a domain. We need to really have affordable solutions for everyone to take part. And we need the advocates and pioneers to go out there, whether it's civilian or military, people that are really going to embody the domain like Billy Mitchell and Hugh Trenchard and Julio Dohe, talk about cyberspace doctrine and aspects that we just currently don't have. We don't have tenets of cyber power. Well, it's hard to lead a war or to talk about cyber capabilities without having doctrine and tenets. Now, this is a phrase that was coined in 1932 in the British Parliament. The bomber always gets through. That's sort of how I view cyber right now. You never hear of the attack that doesn't get through. You hear about the attacks constantly getting through. The bomber always gets through. This is something the defense industry is currently faced with. We always have attacks that succeed. Now, attacks obviously sometimes fail, but the bomber eventually will always break through whatever defenses happen. And it's the idea of fighting through that attack, trying to recover, trying to have an incident response plan, trying to move past this. But it isn't where we need to keep the domain. We need to start talking about solutions outside this. If you looked at this term, you also had people like Billy Mitchell that came out and said, you know what, bombers aren't the only way. We need attack aircraft. We need intelligence and surveillance aircraft. We need other approaches to this little box and idea that we have. And that's really what allowed us to expand the air domain and, again, quote unquote, win it. So that's something I feel that we should be focusing more on, is different ideas instead of just firewalls and solutions that we hear. A good talk going on downstairs, the BYOD. Well, that's an issue that we have to be faced with. But again, as pointed out yesterday, it's not something that's really new. It's access to data. Well, we need to be thinking outside the box and thinking about how we're going to do data and how we're going to do defense differently. Anybody know what this picture is? 1947, President Truman signs the National Security Act. This was created the Air Force. This was the vectored approach. You had the Department of the Navy and the Department of Army bickering over who was going to control air power, who was going to have air assets. Well, this is something that I sort of see us right now in cyber. We're bickering, we're complaining, like, well, whose bubble is this? You know, whose area is this? Well, you own defense, you should do that, or, well, this is your security policy. In the military, we have a little bit of bickering on who's really going to own cyber. The Air Force has tried to stand up and say, well, we are the leading cutting-edge people, we'll do cyber. The Navy's got some pretty talented guys and gals too, same with the Army. And then you've got the National Security Agency doing cyber as well. So I see it as us having currently sort of a split approach, which doesn't necessarily work. I don't think that we need a cyber force. This isn't what I'm trying to get across. I know there are some good debates for a cyber force. I think very good discussion points that need to be had. But again, just more of a vectored approach both in the military and the civilian community to understand that we live and operate in the same domain. We need to understand what we're doing as an industry, as a domain to take it forward. See the next, this one's a little bit harder to guess. It's the Air Corps Tactics School, ACTS. It was the first of its kind in the world where we had education and tactics for air power. You had this school that stood up and said, hey, let's take these pilots and teach other pilots what they've already learned. Let's take tactics and strategy and doctrine and embody it in a school that can have culture and education and tradition. And this is how we're going to take our domain forward. Well, this is an awesome idea that we're still sort of lacking in cyber. We have a few schools in the military that kind of approach this. We have undergraduate cyber training, which is pretty good in the Air Force, trying to get going on teaching cyber officers what it is to be cyber. A really good step we have is this past year, they stood up the cyber track at the weapons school. So you now have cyber weapons officers in the Air Force, which is awesome. It's someone who, again, is going to go look at tactics and doctrine and look at how we go forward. But it's something in the security industry that we really don't. We have SANS and EC Council, and we have all these different schools, but again, it's not so much a culture that everyone can buy into. They're great programs, but very expensive. Again, I want to focus on the fact that we have to have education available to everybody on this from a much earlier standpoint. Then you got the fact that capabilities can be more than just capabilities. Capabilities can be statements, political, economic, socio-political statements. This right here is a B-52, Vietnam, linebacker 2. That was a big statement to the rest of the world when we did this. This wasn't just blowing up a few trees and blowing up people and a B-52 flying in. This was a political statement to the rest of the world that look at our capabilities. Look at what we have and what we can do. Anytime that you use a capability, you're making those same statements. One we'll get into a little bit later, you've heard plenty of for years now, Stuxnet. That was more than just a capability waged by some country. That was a statement, and it had a large statement to all the other nations in the world. I guarantee you, after Stuxnet came out, that nation-state leaders in various countries called meetings and said, first of all, was that us? And second of all, how do we do that? Because that is a big statement. And third of all, for everyone else, is how do we defend against it? And signatures just aren't the way to do it. Then you have the idea that you can blur the lines of war. War can be a very ugly, nasty thing, including with cyber. Technological advancements don't just make the ugliness of war go away. Julio Duhay started talking about the fact that air power can reach out and touch anybody. No more do you have these lines of war. You have the aspects of air power reaching into the heart of a country and attacking civilian populations or their leadership. He truly believed that if you attacked the civilian population, they would crumble, and then the war would be over. Now, he tried to pontificate on this, not to say attacking civilians is necessarily good, but he thought that by doing that, they would end war sooner, and you have less casualties in war. The problem with doing that is we found out that you would attack the civilian population, they'd rally around the cause, they'd rally around the government, they'd rally around what was going on and say, hey, those guys are the bad guys, we're the good guys, we should be doing something about this. Right now, we can't really do that with cyber so much because of attribution. Attribution is sort of this hard, mythical beast to obtain. If you have cyber capabilities and you blur the lines of war and you are able to attack SCADA or you're able to take down the power grid, but you can't figure out who did it, well, now you have a civilian population that's in fear. That's a very scary thought, to be able to be reached out and touched by anybody. Your privacy, your home computer, whatever it is, it's a very scary thought. And until we can really understand attribution and really obtain it, we're not going to be able to rally around and move forward responsibly. So to get into the aspects of the interim years, for me, the interim years of cyberspace began around the Gulf War. So you're looking at Operation Desert Storm, and you start having these cyber capabilities come to life. Before that, it was just the ones and zeros and data starting to figure out what the internet is. You're starting to look at ARPANET. You're really figuring out what is the internet. In Desert Storm, regardless if they were offensive or defensive, I don't know, I wasn't there. They still used cyber capabilities. They were able to connect up and talk to the troops. They were able to understand what was going on in a larger area. It allowed the military leaders to have much more say on what goes on in the battlefield. So you move that forward, and it's a time of nation-states testing out the capabilities, trying to develop those strategies. But you also have non-nation-state actor involvement. I think this is something that is really key to our domain, something I'll touch on a little bit, is the fact that you didn't have too many civilian pilots during World War II going up and taking down German aircraft. But now you've got cyber operators that have computers that they can weaponize with programs and ones and zeros and whatever they want to do, and they can actually have physical or espionage-based capabilities that they can employ against quote-unquote enemies. So it's something that we have to really look at. And then you have ongoing nation-state operations during this time. Again, the boundaries haven't been set. The legal aspects aren't there. You have nation-states that say, well, this isn't war, or this isn't something that's Title 10, Title 50, whatever it may be. We can do this, and it's legal. And that's something that every nation-state currently, or not every nation-state, but most nation-states are looking at ongoing cyber operations and how to use them. We also have powerful statements. I don't know how many of you caught this in the news, but Marine Lieutenant General Richard Mills came out and said that he used cyber capabilities in Afghanistan in 2010. A very public statement, one of the only public statements about things like this, that said, yes, we were using cyber capabilities to impact the enemy. Again, this is the time when these things are coming to light. The cyberspace domain is not going to be the super dark secret domain anymore. You can talk about F-22 and F-35 and talk about the weaponry on it. You talk about cyber weapons, and all of a sudden people start going to jail. But now things are starting to come to light. Now we start getting an aspect of the domain where people are talking about it and trying to push it forward. But we also have other things that happen, like Stuxnet, for instance. We have the New York Times article that most people saw and said, yes, the U.S. and Israel are responsible. Now, to me, that's speculative attribution. Yes, I'm in the Air Force. Yes, I am responsible for my statements, regardless of my statement in the beginning. But I still believe it's speculative. You don't have the government coming out saying, yes, this is us. You may have a lot of proof. You may have a lot of understanding. I mean, when people originally analyzed the code and you were looking at it, it was pretty clear that there was only a few nation-states in the world that could have possibly pulled it off. It wasn't until 2 years later the New York Times article came out and everyone was like, oh, yes, this was them, which people have been saying that for years. But again, still speculative, because a lot of the aspects of the attribution are still false. If you read through from a technical standpoint on the leaks, a lot of the information is physically impossible. However, the attribution is there, and how you deal with that is very important. So now you have the rest of the world that truly believes the U.S. and Israel did it. So regardless if they did or not, they're responsible. Regardless if they want to come out and say this was or was not us, we have to deal with it. Nations will look to us as that person that dropped the figurative atomic bomb, which is a quote I heard and I hate because it's nothing like an atomic bomb, but it's that key moment. So this is what I see as that peak of the interim years. So this is where I think we're going to start going back down. We have to figure out these things in a hurry as we start speeding up, and eventually the interim years are going to stop. And hopefully before we get to that next conflict, I don't think it's going to be World War III, but before we get to that next major conflict, hopefully we understand cyber. Hopefully we understand the legal aspects, cyber deterrence aspects, and really define our terms and doctrine. So then we have Anonymous. Everyone loves Anonymous. I don't, but they're a group that most of you are familiar with. They go out and do whatever they want. But there's someone that you have to consider. Again, it's civilian pilots, right? It's those groups that go out and have real effects on people. If Anonymous, for instance, says, yes, we're based in the U.S., which they're not. They're all around the world, as we all know. But say they were U.S. and there were groups and they went out and had real impacts on another nation, we could be responsible for them. We have to understand how these groups are going to impact the domain. We have to capitalize on it. But we also have good people, right? So this is a guy I really like. Johnny Long does Hackers for Charity. He says, hey, I've got a set of skills. I like this. I'm talented. I'm going to go make a difference. So he raises money, he takes his skills, and he works in Africa. And he tries to teach people and give them access to IT and internet facilities and say, hey, go out and learn, and I'm going to make your quality of life just that much better. So you've got these independent actors. You've got the Jester. Most people know about the Jester. He's a hacktivist for good. I don't typically advocate for people to go out and do their own things. I think that's going out against Al-Qaeda, going out against terrorist organizations, doing cyber operations on your own can be a very scary thing. It's something that everyone should take seriously. Take seriously if you ever considered it, because there's real life consequences to it. The Jester, really good guy, lives in fear. He understands that people want to kill him. So even though he does great things in my mind, and he's pro-military and supports Wounded Warrior Project, and I like what he does, I still empathize with the fact that as a cyber operator acting outside of the military, there's real consequences. And sometimes you can have consequences of messing up an operation. If the U.S. military is currently monitoring forums and they're getting real intelligence capabilities out of that, and someone goes in and takes down the forum thinking they're doing a good job, well, now they've just ruined an operation. So, again, I like this guy. I think he's, or gal, I haven't met him or her, but I like the person. But again, is that understanding that everyone can be an operator, but how you do it has to be well defined. And we have to figure out as a domain how we're going to handle these type of things, how we're going to handle cyber militias. But there's also just groups of intellectual people like this, Operation ONA. It's this group that got together of individuals that said, hey, we're forensics responders, we're incident guys, we're malware reverse engineers. Let's create an email distro and talk about signatures and malware and everything that's out there right now and the advanced threats, and talk about how you counter them at your security location and how we can apply it other ways. So there's all this information sharing and incredibly smart people going on in the world, in the domain, and it's out there. Everyone wants to play a part. No one really wants skills in cyber to sit back and not be a part of the domain. So again, this is something in the interim years that we have to be ready for, we have to capitalize on. We have to figure out how we're going to use it productively. So, civ-mil sharing. This is where I think that we really get the bang for our buck. You get the varied expertise, like I was talking about with Operation ONA. You get threat intelligence sharing. That's awesome. That's how you do cyber defense. Writing a signature is a reactive thing to a cyber attack. But understanding your adversary, having real actionable threat intelligence on intrusion sets and the type of capabilities they might use allows you to create proactive defense against those attacks. AV scanners just simply don't prevent the advanced threat. I don't like the term APT, but they don't prevent the advanced threat. But we also get development times reduced. Patches, right? So we heard talks yesterday. It's great to see patches that get developed for 0 days in a month or two. That's actually pretty fast and it's pretty sharp. But that's that month or two that people are vulnerable to that. And really, it's probably that year or two that people are vulnerable to that before that vulnerability was disclosed. So we need to reduce those development times by doing threat intelligence and sharing and getting out there as a community better. And more than that, education and innovation solutions. When we have, again, schools that are teaching cyber, when you have real cyber educators and real availability in terms of conferences and cheap solutions, you're going to have people thinking outside the box, and you're going to have people getting to defense and doing it correctly. So the seriousness of the future. So this is a pretty powerful statement here by Secretary Panetta, talking about the fact that there's a true cyber capability threat of bringing down power grids. Everyone's heard of this, and there's a lot of FUD out there about cyber war and all of this. But at the end of the day, some aspects of it are real. Cyber war in of itself, I don't like that term because you don't have just cyber war. You will never have just air war. You'll never have just land war. You will have war, and you'll have aspects of that from every single domain. You don't just have cyber war. We have cyber conflict and cyber attacks, which is what I believe he's talking about here. And those are still very serious threats. So when you get past the FUD, there still is a very serious threat that has to be considered. You talk about turning off the lights, talking about generators and turbines that are custom made, and they take 4 months to replace. You take down the power in Seattle, and you can't get it back for 4 months. Life is going to change a little bit. But then you have nation-state weapons. So nation-state weapons in general are not single-purpose anymore. As a military, we don't go out and say, hey, let's create a tactical fighter that's only good against one other fighter. It's not very efficient. We have to plan out. We have to have approval processes and acquisition phases. We have to look at multiple types of payloads that we can put onto these platforms to say, hey, this UAV can do, or for the unmanned aerial vehicle, this unmanned aerial vehicle, like a Predator, can do this mission, but if we stick this pod on it, now it can do something else. You have an F-35 where you say, hey, this missile is good against air targets, but this bomb is good against ground targets. Well, I think that's where we're coming with cyber. We have to have platforms from an offensive standpoint that are able to adapt to the changing threats and changing landscape. You don't have static targets. You have to be able to adapt on the fly, and especially having a lot of unknowns, because a lot of the true buck is from intelligence, and a lot of times intelligence is wrong. So we actually see this with what happened in Stuxnet and Dooku. So with Stuxnet and Dooku, and this is just my own graphical understanding of it, you have the different modules inside Stuxnet and Dooku, but they're two very similar threats, made by the same nation state, made likely by the same group inside that nation state, but they share that common driver. They share programming, they share source code. There's a lot of modules that are staying between the two, but you have two very different weapons. You have Dooku, which is not so much a weapon, it's an information stealing Trojan. It was able to get in and steal large amounts of information from various companies and laboratories and elsewhere in the world. And you have Stuxnet, which everyone knows destroyed the centrifuges in Iran. Actually, ones and zeros, physical degradation on systems, blowing out of their shells and casings. Very interesting, very cool and scary at the same time. But again, one common driver. So you're looking at this same aspect of nation-state weaponry right here. You're looking at a weapon that had to go through an acquisition phase. It had to go through approval processes. Regardless if it was U.S., Russia, China, it does not matter. Every country has very similar approaches to procuring weaponry. So you have a common platform. You have something that they're looking like an F-35, for instance. It's very advanced, but that's harder to defend against for security people. Now you can't just write a signature for this because they'll change a few modules and it's something else. Again, getting back to that education and intelligence sharing to really counter these threats. And you've got powerful statements, again, for this interim years sort of feel. You have General Norton Swartz, while he was the Chief of Staff, he came out and said, the Air Force is pursuing cyber methods to defeat aircraft. Pretty crazy. Ones and zeros dropping an F-16 or the enemy's counter for that out of the sky. Planes dropping out of the sky with cyber methods. Now, as a cyber guy, I love that. That's cool. That's awesome, right? We want to be all want to be operators and cowboys and all that great stuff. But it's also really scary. You start talking about being able to plug into USBs in an airplane, and you have access, and you have air gaps, right? Something like that between the pilot's cockpit and the rest of the passengers. Works super well for everybody. Yeah, it's this real aspect of scary capabilities out in the world. But again, you see the Russians and Chinese have designed specific electronic warfare platforms to go after all our high-value assets. We have a lot of high-value assets in the military that are pretty nifty, and we don't want them being countered. That's the Deputy Secretary of Defense, Ashton Carter. You've got people like the Chief of Staff and the Secretary of Defense and the Deputy Secretary coming out and making these statements. They're not doing it to sell a product. They're not doing the FUD game. Yeah, there's the whole aspect of Congress and funding, but these guys put their names on the line to represent the domain, to talk about real things that are going on. They're not just making things up. So now you've got to wonder about these cyber capabilities, and again, how do security professionals counter against them? We start looking at the aspects of cyber espionage, again, with information stealing from certificate authorities and industrial control systems and laboratories, where no information is really secure. How do you counter that? What do you do with that? Start having the aspect of cyber attacks to look at satellite communication networks and SCADA systems and internet nodes. We all take advantage of how the internet is formed and what it looks like, but it's not that secure and it's not that difficult to mess with. And these are things that we take for granted and that we want to pretend that are safe. We want to pretend that we have privacy in. But privacy and safety is really just perception, and how we move forward and how we understand how we're going to defend it. That's important. But then you have military conflict. As I was talking about earlier, it's not cyber war, right? You have conflict. You start looking at military conflict, and you start thinking about the feel-good defenses. Coastal defenses make a population feel good. Mobile command and control and attack and defense aircraft make a population feel good. In general, if 9/11 happened, F-16s went up in the sky and patrolled around in case Russians, early on, no one really knew what was going on. They're feel-good defenses. They're there to protect the population. Missile and radar systems, those are very important to a population. But again, you start talking about being able to out and reach and touch anybody at any location. You talk about cyber capabilities to take down these defenses. Well, that's something different than security. That's a very serious threat. That's not a, hey, my security company is making quarterly profits. That's people are dying. And I think that's something that we don't generally grasp that well. I think a lot of these discussions can be one and the same, but we just don't tackle these issues. You all as security professionals and researchers and educators and whatever it is that you do in your aspect, every one of you play a part in this domain, and every one of you are responsible in some aspect for your own skills and what you do in your jobs. And so some of the reasons that I come out here is almost a plea to everyone to take things just a little more seriously. As an Air Force officer, I have guys and gals that I lead, people that are very important to me, people that I care about, and I don't like to think of them dying because of cyber capabilities. I don't like to think of people losing in conflict and truly people dying when there's educated and smart people that can tackle these issues. Whether you like the military or not is not the big thing. Whether you trust the government or not is not the big thing. I'm not up here on a platform, trust the government. I would never go out there and say that. But I still think it's something that we all play a role in, and it's very important that we all take part and we have that combined attitude towards it. So in conclusion, I really want to just focus on the fact that education is what I consider the key to all of this. We have to have true education from an early standpoint, and we have to have opportunities for the young generation to take advantage of. If I did not join the military, I would have nothing to do with cyber. I can't afford $4,000 classes from SANS, as great as they are and as much as I love them. I cannot afford $3,000 conferences. That's not going to happen. I'm originally from Alabama. Currently I live in Germany. Military is a pretty sweet deal for me, but I would have never even touched this domain. However you all got involved, whether it was black hat hacking, white hat hacking early on, falling into it, doing consulting work, whatever it is, you got here and you're able to participate, most likely because of your job. We need to push this out. We need to push education and conferences and aspects of the domain for everybody. We need to be able to have those kids that look at the capabilities and go, man, I want to fly, fight, and win, or whatever the key term of the day is. I want to be able to go out and I want to take part in that. I want to develop a solution that'll really protect my country, or whatever it is. That's very important. And on the other side, it's also an aspect of deterrence. When you have an educated population, when you have capabilities that are being displayed, now you've got other nations looking, going, man, they're pretty sharp. You may not want to mess with them with cyber. There's that real deterrence aspect. To me, security and privacy is another big thing that I always step on, or stomp on. I really feel that security and privacy can go hand in hand. I'm that optimistic person that believes that privacy can happen. I don't think that we as a population, you as civilians, most of you, should ever think that giving up privacy is a good idea in terms of cyber. You have to demand more. You have to say, I want privacy and security, and it's doable. And it's doable through education and information sharing and intelligence. This is something that we all can take part in. We have to apply lessons learned not only from AirPower, but from the other domains. We have to take lessons learned from McAfee or Symantec or Adobe and things that they do and apply them to everything that we do. You have to understand that the adversary, they're not sitting by thinking, man, I wonder what new threat I can take advantage of. They're out there informed, sharing information. They're out there understanding the landscape of what they're going to attack. They do intelligence gathering, and then they attack. We need to operate in a similar manner. And then we must work together. Government, civilian, hackers, whatever it may be. We all have skills, and I want to just stomp that again. We all have skills, and we should really start working together a little bit better. I know this is sort of like an optimistic speech, you know, holding hands, privacy, and defense. It sounds great, but I truly believe in it, or I wouldn't come to these kind of conferences and speak. I truly believe that we can make the domain a more secure place by all truly working together and pushing education. And in general, I think that pushing the domain in a darker direction is not the correct way. When you start talking about an IAEA of cyber, when you start talking about regulating cyber weapons and saying, yes, only this country can have them or that country can't, I think that pushes the domain in a wrong way, because those capabilities will always be there. Anytime that you have hacker kids or whoever that have a computer, they're going to come up with capabilities. So instead of just trying to pretend that it doesn't exist and not talking about it, we should be out there, security professionals and the military and the government, talking about what's available and bringing it into the light and discussing openly how are we going to fix these issues that we have. So I kind of kept this short because I figured this would be more of an interactive kind of discussion. Any of you have questions or comments about cyber in terms of the domain or the interim years, or really just the Air Force and government in general? Yes. Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, that's a really good point. I feel that it's always going to be sort of that dual-hatted approach, and to some extent we have to accept that, but we have to structure ourselves and vector ourselves properly to tackle that issue. when you have the military, the military's purpose is national defense, national security. So we have to wage offensive capabilities. So you look, and if Stuxnet was us, then obviously there was intelligent people smarter than I sitting around in a room figuring out, one, how do you do this, and two, why do we need to do this? I guarantee you a lot of people went into that discussion. No one wakes up in the morning and goes, how do we screw things up today? Like, it just doesn't happen. People generally have ideas and they want to take them forward. So when you start looking at those capabilities making statements, they will always make statements on behalf of the military. They will always make those statements about offense. But to your point, there are a lot of resources like NIST that we have to take advantage of in terms of defensive standards. And it's not just with government programs. Again, it's with everybody. A lot of the programming I picked up was through OpenCourseWare. MIT does classes for free online, Code Academy, or YouTube videos. Any tool you ever wanted to think about using, you can do a YouTube video on it. You can watch it and learn it. A lot of that information is not out there, but you can learn things for free. And I think that we really, again, all have to pitch in with saying, hey, I may not like this government organization, but you know what? I've got an idea about how they can do it better. I guess I'll contribute. That's one thing I usually tell people. If you hate the government, then jump on board and try to change it. You know, try to do something. You can't sit there and criticize and not have a solution. I mean, that's the most anti-productive thing possible, is just say, you suck. I don't know why, but you suck. That's not a good approach. So when you look at these organizations, again, that are putting out these documents on security and putting out understandings of here's how you can do security, I feel that it's very important for everyone to take part, to look at those documents, to critique them, to say, hey, you're pretty good on most of this, but here's how I would do this differently, and this is why it's important. Again, sort of that huggy-feely, all of us can do this together kind of aspect, but to an extent we have to. I can tell you that, not in my government role, but just in theorizing how I would attack, say, a SCADA plant, I would go after the low-hanging fruit, and I would do information reconnaissance. I would say, hey, I'm going to get in this local power plant that's not that well secured and maybe not have a lot of access to stuff, but it has documents, it has schematics, it has information that I can gather. I would do information gathering and get ready for an attack, and then I would do it against a larger target. There's no reason that we aren't tackling that low-hanging fruit, too. There's no reason that we're not going around saying, hey, all right, well, this company has a lot of access to my data, or this power company has access to the internet and has access to the electricity around the area. How do I make it better? How do I contribute? Everything doesn't have to be done for dollars and cents. It can be done for the aspect of getting things done and actually securing the domain. So any more questions? Yes? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I completely agree. I think that really is where it comes down to your sphere of influence. I think you have to get out and wherever it is that your sphere of influence is and make it better. And if you can't get to that general counsel, that's fine. Educate and mentor the people below you and around you. Again, with my push for education, that's something that's incredibly important, is making your sphere better, and it will ripple out. In terms of sharing, I'm going to have to quote from Jurassic Park, which is whatever, but when it says, you know, life will find a way. Well, information sharing will find a way if you're an advocate about it. If you say, man, I really want to get this information out there, and it's not illegal to do so, you will find the right emailing list and people that are intelligent personnel that are sharing and understanding these ideas. And that general counsel person or whoever it is at above, hopefully they either get on board or get out of the way. And if it doesn't happen, which you're all security professionals, you know it doesn't necessarily happen. Sometimes the best guy and gal don't get picked for the job. You still have to find a way to influence your sphere and make it better. I would comment with that, back to my earlier point about security and privacy. Exactly what you're talking about. You have to demand both. You can't demand one. You can't say, you know what, here's all the access to my networks, and I guess I'll be secure now. You can't do that. It's not a win-win solution. But at the same time, you can't sit there and go, well, unless I get 100% of my way, I'm not budging, because that doesn't work from a government standpoint either. Whether it's the threat company or the government coming in, there has to be a compromise. Yeah, right? You know, I actually find, though, again, that a lot of these people that we sort of feel cynical about, again, don't come in and say, I want to screw everything up. Today, I want to be a jerk. It just doesn't happen. Everyone wants to influence their sphere to some level, but I think a lot of people just aren't informed. I think a lot of, when you talk about congressmen or generals or whoever, a lot of people get bad information. They have people on their staffs that probably shouldn't be on their staffs that feed them information that make them look bad or make them choose wrong decisions. But again, that's where you all, being security-minded people, understanding, learning, pushing, think to yourselves about how your sphere of influence can be better. Getting involved makes a big difference. And I think that really once we start pushing on education and tactics and doctrine, all the stuff that maybe not all that exciting as the ones and zeros and 0 days that people come up with, but still very important aspects, I think we're going to see ripple effects in the domain on how security is really done. When you have those educated people. I can point to various colleges and high schools around the globe that are trying to do security and trying to talk about cyber, and they're just doing it poorly. But they're trying. So get involved and help. There's universities that I go to and I give them information. I just go out and I guest lecture, or I try to help them out to try to guide, because that's my small sphere of influence. And anybody that's ever worked with me knows that I'm not that intelligent as a person. So you all, being intelligent, can do a whole heck of a lot more. Get involved. Go out and make your sphere better. And I know that it's a very hippie-ish approach, but I really think that's the only approach we have going for us for the long-term win. Signature-based defense and trying to do BYOD defense or whatever for today is not going to fix the issues we are continually getting hit with. We have to look at a long-term approach. Any more questions? We got plenty of time to discussion if anyone wants. Yes. Yes. Right. Yes. So it's controversial for a number of reasons. One, money. When you talk about the government budget, and you look at the DoD's budget, and then you say, hey, I'm going to split off a portion of that budget to build a cyber force, you have generals and congressmen and everyone else that aren't too happy with that. When you look at what it took to get an Air Force, it was the interim years on the verge of World War II. You're looking at, after World War II, we're looking at losses and lessons learned and going, man, we got our tails kicked in some aspect because we were bickering and fighting. And you look at the Navy building aircraft for ground defense, and Army building aircraft for coastal defense. They were stepping all over each other's lines. And finally, Congress had to step in and go, you know what, we'll do an Air Force. It takes a lot to get past that resistance. And I think currently we don't need a cyber force. I think we need a vector approach. In the Air Force, something that is probably not that popular for me to speak on, but that I feel pretty passionately about, is we currently have 17 Delta, a cyberspace officer. But I can go do routers and switches and network connectivity with Cat5, or I can do cyber operations for agencies and stuff. That's how varied the career field is. So now I might get trained up with taxpayer money to do a cyber operation and do cyber mission, large investment from taxpayers, and then turn right around and do something that has no effect on what I do, and my training sort of fades. Now, I understand that there's aspects to that, and there's very intelligent and good conversations on why we should or should not have it that way. I feel it's the wrong approach. Other intelligent people probably feel it's the right approach. Well, you could bring your defensive solutions to monitoring the routers that we gave all the access to someone else instead of ourselves. Like, it just doesn't work in my mind. So I feel that there's things that we can do before getting to the point of needing a cyber force. We may need a cyber force one day. We may have to do something. Could be a civilian solution. There's been good discussions here at the conference even on how you would have a almost DHS role of having a cyber force, but actually people that understand it and do it well. And not saying that DHS doesn't, but I don't think we're at that point yet. I think there's a lot of stuff that we could do and do better, again, with education and vectoring our own approach and our own doctrine and tactics before getting to that stage. Yeah. Right. Right. Mm-hmm. So I agree, it's very tempting, the whole black hat side of things to get information. As a person that can figure out how to, strip a password from documents or whatever, it's very tempting to pirate, classes that I want to take. I don't, because it's a moral decision. Of course, I would say that's the answer anyways, but I really don't. But it's very tempting for people, especially people that have a little bit of understanding about how to do it. I don't advocate that, obviously, but to your point, we have to make sure that we allow education to be available. So going back to these conference ideas, imagine a conference where you would have free entry and you would have all sorts of displays, and people could be recruiting as well, so it could be sponsored maybe by those personnel. And you have kids of all ages and adults and whoever coming in and looking at real cyber stuff, not talks like this. So a lot of stuff like that, but now think about things that are sponsored and helped by the government. Start thinking about the government coming out and saying, hey, here's a cyber capability that we haven't weaponized and that we're not going to use, but look at it, play around with it. You have a guy in uniform talking to kids and showing them on a laptop how to do something pretty neat. Like, that'd be a powerful statement. Yeah, so he showed up at DEF CON and pretty, exactly, so, right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I agree. I mean, look at, so again, somebody that I really like, Johnny Long, talking about how he went out and said, my sphere of influence is X, and I'm going to take it and push it to Y. I'm going to go out in Africa and do some good work and help people get some education. That was his sphere of influence, and he's doing really great work. Again, you all are incredibly intelligent people. You have skills. You have things that you give back. Volunteer some time. Go to a local high school and teach some of these programs. I find it very rare, even for myself, for personnel to say, no, we don't want your help. There's not been a university yet that I've said, hey, I can come in and help you on your cyber program, that has turned me away. Now, granted, like it or not, being an Air Force officer carries a little bit more weight than if I was just, some normal guy. But at the same time, y'all have skills and tactics and professional certifications or whatever it is that makes you more professional than even a military officer. So go out and influence your sphere. I don't think that we're going to fix the domain by having a conference. I don't think that this, slideshow of Star Wars and everything else is really going to fix the domain. But it's what I see as my sphere of influence. So I'm trying to do something about it. I would challenge you all to go do the same thing. Give back to your local high schools. Give back to your local universities. Close that gap. Make somebody better. And it will ripple out. And people will do the same thing. And eventually you'll have real impact off of the good humanitarian kind of work that you're doing. And I think that there's nothing more fulfilling than realizing, hey, I'm making a difference. So yeah, help out the programs, help out the schools, make those curriculums. I'm working right now with a university to develop their cybersecurity track. Instead of showing people, hey, we can do attribution through traceroute, which is why I left one of the universities, you can do real attribution and talk about real cybersecurity aspects in a curriculum program and educate people. I think that's what we really, really have to do for the long term. Any other questions? Yes. Yes, sir. Yes. Yes, there is. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. So in terms of the high-level stuff, in terms of like Congress and what needs to be done there, obviously there's certain legislation that has to happen. We have to define terms. We have to figure out what it is we're going to call cyber weapons, what it is we're going to call actionable threat intelligence, and how you're going to share it. That has to be done. The term cyber, I love the term cyber. So obviously I like the term cyber, being a cyber officer, but no, but we should kill some other words, and like cyber war. Anyways, back to your point though, I feel that there's really a way for us to do it when it comes to legislation. It has to come from that area. But again, talking about sphere of influence and trying to tie it back, those people are only good as the information they get. Very intelligent people, they deserve to get in their position, maybe not. It doesn't matter, they're there. How you influence, how you share that information, how you try to make them a better product is really what it comes down to. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I agree, and I think that hits on some points made about the cyber force. Like, is the military the right role for this? The whole cyber aspect. Is it against our nature to go out and do some of the things that are required? You know, what lines is it crossing when now it's inside our borders? You know, what about outside the borders? You know, all those different aspects. And I think, again, talking back to the vectored approach, that's something that we really have to take a sharp look at. Are we the right people? And if we are, let's figure it out. And if not, get out of the way. But I really truly believe that in the day, if we take that vectored approach and we start pushing through those walls, that's where we're going to win. So the agencies that don't like to communicate, or people that don't want to share information, usually you'll find people in the middle range or maybe a little bit higher range that are pushing back because they don't understand things. And it has to be that new generation educating and pushing out, and when I say new generation, I include everyone in this room. It's not talking like 20-something years old. Just our generation of people doing cyber have to push through those borders and say, no, we're going to share. We're going to create this network. This is how it happens. And I think that there's an overclassification of data when you start looking at actionable threat intelligence. I was fortunate enough to get a chance to talk to General Lord, who is the Air Force's lead cyber guy. He's in charge of all the cyber assets. And he agreed that there's an overclassification of data. He said, don't you think that it's a little odd that some things are TS and some things are S and some things are unclassified, and there's no real measuring stick on why that's TS and that's secret. Some people claim there is, and you can look at the reports, and yeah, this is how we classify things, but a lot of things are overclassified. We go, oh, that's shiny, stamp, classified. That's not a very good approach to sharing, because now I can't give the Department of Security a TS, no foreign document, that does X, Y, or Z. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Absolutely. And that's, yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, so to go ahead and, well, we are out of time, so I just want to go ahead and close it out and say, first of all, thank you for coming. And second of all, if you could take anything away from it, please know that this is what I consider the interim years. It has to happen now. Defense is not going to get easier. So please go out and try to influence your sphere and educate those around you. Try to do something positive, because it's the only way we're going to win in the long run. Thank you.